I believe you are live.
Okay. Ooh, fun.
Yeah, we appear to be.
Yes.
Oh, and immediately Naoise vanishes.
Ah.
I was posting on Twitter.
They're just abandoning us, Naoise.
Sorry to give you abandonment issues. You know what they say about victims turning into abusers.
But since we are live and at least in some realm have Naoise again, who the hell are we?
We are unlicensed oral arts. Yep.
We are super professional and have definitely planned out everything for the season.
We've been doing this for a year.
Yeah.
And we still don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you count Naoise and I when we tried to do it through Facebook Live.
Yeah. No, that counts.
We had various technological issues.
I have to say, we are getting better. It's only like small increments, but we're getting better each live stream.
I mean, like, come back in 10 years, we'll be having a smooth operation, but
yeah,
YouTube will be dead. We'll all be living underwater.
Yeah, like at that point, everyone's just going to be living in cyberspace, while getting their bodies fed by tubes and coffins.
More tubes.
Oh, so the Matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, but voluntary.
Okay, so we've already got the tangents. Now we just need the titillation and the terror.
Yes. So
that does need to be our new tagline.
It is. I'm going to be using it a lot.
The three of you guys.
What do we do? We're pure innocent little puppy dogs.
Have you heard the stories you tell, Mrs. Coniferous Plants?
Stories. We are a storytelling collective, and we totally didn't just decide a couple of days ago that this month is being dedicated to queer tales, queer folklore, queer mythology, because in case you haven't noticed, I'm pretty sure none of us are straight in the classical definition, and we are celebrating this fact. So,
yep. Yeah, us big bunch of queers are going to get queer, and they're queering stories. I don't know where I was going with that sentence. I started it and didn't have an ending.
We're going to wave our gay agenda at you, and then argue about the tradition.
So, if anybody has any queries, they can be put into the chat,
and we may see them.
Start with a pun so early on.
Michael is saying hello. Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Well, we've got confirmation that we've got one audience member. So I'm trying to remember. There was a short story that oh yeah, it's not quite exactly LGBT themed, but it came up in my research today, so I have to talk about it. Apparently, England back in the day was absolutely plagued with dragons. Were flying all over the place, all times of night. You couldn't get any sleep. And what they were doing is they were constantly jerking off in the sky, and their semen was lakes and rivers and other sources of fresh water. And as I'm sure we all know, dragon semen is actually incredibly toxic. It is classified as a biohazard. So this is causing an awful lot of problems for the people. So a very clever priest got everyone together and said, lads, don't panic. All we have to do is ward off these dragons, then they'll stop ejaculating our heads, stop ejaculating into our water, and we won't die from eating too much dragon semen. All we have to do is burn bones on a fire. So they went around all the graveyards, they went around all the farms, gathered up all the bones of humans, animals, and anything they could find. They lumped them onto fires, and from that day on, the dragons stopped ejaculating into the water sources of the poor people of Great Britain. And that's why there's no dragons left there, because that was the way they reproduced, kind of like frogs, dragon spawn. So by the mere fact that we didn't want to swallow dragon semen, dragons are now a dead species, and I hope that makes us feel happy about ourselves.
Naoise? Why do you do this to me?
I report.
We made it 2 minutes into the stream. 2 minutes before Seaman came on.
So the moral
That's
of the
a
story is, if you want to help prevent mass extinction, you need to gargle more animal semen.
Yeah, basically. But also, that's where bonfires come from. There's only due to bonfires. It's actually bone fires. Burning bones keep dragons from ejaculating in your water. So I think I've set the tone.
Yeah.
The tone in Emily's voice.
I like dragons.
So
Yeah,
do I. That's
too.
why I think you should have stopped them.
They're
One of my big gripes about Irish mythology is lack of dragons.
They're a combination of two of my favorite things: fairy tales and dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Who doesn't know that?
Mm.
I am still surprised that more early paleontologists didn't go around going, "We have just found dragons. We're going to set out and prove this now."
There is one of the more recently discovered species, literally called, it was literally named Dracorex.
Dragon
Oh.
King.
Yeah, Dragon King.
Why are we letting them name things in Latin? They're just coming up with bullshit. Sound all fancy and scientific.
Allosaurus. The Allosaurus is literally just named the other lizard. Gallimimus means fake chicken.
Chicken.
No.
We have Aoife's also joined us and has given us lots of rainbow hearts.
Yay.
I'm just
Hello,
keeping an eye on the chat. Right. Next story. Please don't be as depressing as killing off all the dragons.
So I have a cute little love story. So it was down west in Kerry, and as we all know, things in Kerry can be very strange. Now, there was this young woman, beautiful young woman. She was heading up from the seaside, right? Heading up to Killarney to sell her fish. On her way along the road, she runs into another young woman, and as young women tend to do, they started gossiping. And they talked for ages and ages, but as they talked, they started walking a little bit slower because, well, you can't keep up a good pace while you're having a good gossip, can you? And by the time they reached the next town, they found it had gotten dark. It was too dark to keep going. Now, the other young woman, she had a friend in the town that she could go stay with, but the young woman selling her fish, well, she didn't know anyone. So up she walks to the first house she sees, knocks on the door. She sees a light come on inside. And who opens the door but an equally gorgeous young woman? Now, the young woman with the fish says, "Well, I've nowhere to stay tonight. Would you mind if I maybe even stayed in your barn or in your attic?" She was like, no, the attic, that's out of commission. You can't go in the attic. But I'll let you stay if you help me churn some butter in the barn. So out they went to the barn, and there was the cows and the milk, and they got the butter churn out, and they started churning the butter. They lifted it, and they dropped it down, and they swirled it around, and around and around, and then they beat it, and they brought it up and down and swirled it around. And by the time they had finished churning the butter, well, they were churning each other's butter. They churned that butter all night long, all across the barn. The cows were a little bit disturbed by this, but you know, cows seen everything you could ever hope to see with that respect. So, you know, so up and down the barn, they're churning the butter, and eventually they collapse onto the hay. And they go into the house and they have a little post-churning tea brack and cup of tea. They don't put butter on the tea brack, but as they're having their cup of tea, the young woman whose house it was turns to the young woman who was selling her fish, and she says, "There's a dead man in the attic, The woman telling the fish said, "Oh, right, so there is. Because, well, this is the west of Ireland, weird dead people just flying about places while it happens." Then the woman who owned the house turns to the woman who sells the fish. She says, "I need to tell you something if you're going to be staying here tonight. Something strange happens every night to that dead man in the attic. You see, that dead man, he was my husband, and he wasn't very good at churning butter at all. And he wasn't very generous with his butter either. He never spread it around, never really took care of the needs, wouldn't melt me at all. And he also wouldn't leave any butter out for the fairies. Now, as he went through his whole life, never leaving butter out for the fairies did, they decided they were going to give him another chance to be leaving butter out. So after he died, well, we thought that would be the end of it. But it came to the wake, and he woke up. Now every night he wakes up, and the fairies wait for their butter, but he's a mean old fucker, so he's never given it to them, not once. Now the woman who sells the fish turned to the woman who owned the house, and she says, "You know what? It's not right at all. Let's see what we can do about that." So it gets dark. It's now the dark of the night, and they hear from upstairs creaking, and then a thump, thump, 2 feet landing on the floor, and then a slow thunk, 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 as the dead man's feet walk across the floor, and then a quick as he half falls down the stairs, and then a slow as he finally reaches the bottom. Now he looks at his wife, who's the woman who owns the house, and he looks at the woman who owns the fish, who's now very close to the woman who owns the house, and he cries out, "Not in my house!" And the woman who owns the house says, "It's actually my house now, you're dead. You know, till death do us part is what we say." So the dead man, he starts running towards the woman who sells the fish, and the woman who sells the fish jumps on the back of the dead man, and she holds on for dear life. And he's thrashing and trying to throw her off, and she won't let go, not a bit. So the dead man, he starts chasing the woman who owns the house down the road. Down the road they go. And the woman who owns the fish grabbing onto the back of the man who owned the house, was married to the woman who owns the house, who never left out the butter. So they're running and running and running. And then the morning comes. He goes stiff as a board. And then the woman who sells the fish, she found she was stuck. She couldn't get off the man who was dead, who owned the house, who was married to the woman who owns the house, who was now close to the woman who sells the fish. So they're dragging him back. The woman who sells the fish launched onto the back, and the woman who owns the house grabbing him by his outstretched arms and pulling him back to the house. They can't manage to get him up the stairs, so what do? Is they leave him in the barn. Now, the woman who owns the fish is still stuck to the back of the man who owned the house, who's married to the woman who owns the house, who's now close to the woman who sells the fish. So they sit there and they talk quietly. And then the woman who owns the house goes back, gets a bit of tea brack, and she spreads a bit of the fresh butter that they just churned the day before onto the tea brack. It's not an innuendo. And they have a bit of a talk and a bit of tea brack. And then it starts to get dark again. And the woman who sells the fish can feel the man, I'm not going to say it again, can feel him loosening, softening under her. And then he collapses down and he groans. Ugh. Ugh. She carefully stands up from him and grabs the churn from the barrel of butter and holds it out as you would a spear or a lance or any proper weapon at all, even a hurl. The man, he slowly picks himself up, stands up, looks at the woman who sells the fish, who is now holding the butter from the churn that she helped churn with the woman who owns the house, who was married to the man who owned the house. He goes to grab the butter. But he's not very steady on his feet, you see, being dead and all. goes to grab the butter off the churn, but it just comes out in his hands. And he falls down. He's still very tired from last night's exertions and from being dragged back to the barn. And he sits. He sighs. He falls asleep. He's sitting there with the butter in his hands, laid out. And the woman who owns the house takes the butter churn from the woman who sells the fish, puts it back into the barrel. They go back into the house, close the door, lock it. And the next morning, after a little bit more butter churning, they go back out to look in the barn. And they see the man. And his hands are clean of butter. And his body is rotten. All the flesh is hanging off. His eyes are gone. And he looks even deader than he did before. But at least he had a smile on his face. Because this time, he'd stay dead.
Well, I now have a new phrase for going on the pull. I'm off to sell my fish. We have some comments in the chat, which I think we're going to go through, and because I think they might need explaining. Stephen, what are the vampire lady leprechauns of Shneem? And are they canonically lesbians?
We need Paddy to tell us where he found that.
Yes. I'm not sure it's really real. Like,
No,
I
it
think it's
it is.
Paddy.
No,
I'm fairly-
I found it in a Bob reference to it in a Bob Kern book.
Oh,
I think I did. I might have dreamt I did.
Is
But-
it in the truth about leprechauns?
well,
It's in the truth about leprechauns. The opening section is the bit that I think talks about Shneem. The other bit is set in the Scottish Highlands. But as Stephen's uncomfortable noises indicate, we have recently had some troubles with Bob Curran with actors.
Oh. Well, I was going to say that it's been repeated by Paddy, then repeated by me, then repeated by other people, so that if it wasn't folklore to begin with, it has now become
oh
folklore.
yeah, it is now.
That's how folklore works.
Yeah, it's definitely
who-
folklore now.
So who or what are the vampire leprechauns of Shneem?
Nisha?
Well, supposedly, the vampire lady leprechauns of Shneem are a tribe of diminutive women who bear some resemblance to the leprechaun, who like to wait for hunters out in the hills to tire of a day's hunt, settle down by the fire, at which point they'll pop along to the fire, make them very comfortable, and then we'll start biting to everyone's neck and draining them of blood before going off to engage in rampant lesbian orgies.
They also seem to be very Catholic, because if you break your Lenten fast, they will come to you in the night and suck
And
your
take
blood.
you away to lesbian orgies.
They wouldn't. The story wouldn't in the book wouldn't mention anything about Dún Druch Ola, would it?
I haven't the
No.
faintest idea
No,
because
no,
I
no.
can't remember words in Irish.
Okay, all
What's-
right.
No, it's not.
Drogheda.
It's not Bob from home that vampires are an indigenous Irish creation, which they're not.
No,
Yeah,
they're universal issue.
Dún Druch Ola is something that Bob Curran says he heard about. It's a castle. It means fort of the bad blood, according to Bob. And
Yeah.
it's a castle he heard about in County Kerry. And where he heard about it was in a lecture by Sean O'Sullivan that apparently nobody else has ever attended.
I mean, I've been to plenty of one solo lectures given by experts in Irish folklore. I mean,
Looking in the
that's
mirror
nothing
doesn't
to
count,
do at all.
Nisha.
But really, we need to ask Paddy, as you know, the Kerry man storyteller that we all know.
I think Paulie sometimes forgets what he's made up over the years.
That is the problem. If anyone watching this likes doing fan art, I would love to see a sort of Hammer Horrors from the 60s style poster for the Vampire Lady Leprechauns of Shneem. I would love to see.
I'm imagining a lot of white stockings.
Moving on, Deirdre is amazed that she sees Naoise in colour and has also said, "Move for me has evolved." Sinead, what is move for me?
Oh, move for me is my interpretation of the birth of Lou. His father, Cian, was he owned a cow called the Glashgowan, who would never run out of milk, and he was very close to this cow. Very close to the cow. And when he meets Etna, Lou's mother, they have a wild night of passionate mooing, involving a lot of kind of cattle whips, moo for me, let me see those udders, I mean breasts, the usual sort of first time hanky panky lark.
Eva comments that she loves a good post churn tea brack. I was amazed they didn't put butter on the tea brack, because I mean tea brack with butter, they
were all buttered out. They buttered each other up enough.
I suppose we don't want to mix.
There's always room for a bit of butter on a bit of brack. Not a proper bit of brack.
Putting too much butter.
Stephen, does Batman, is he lactose intolerant that he doesn't share his butter?
He's not much of a fan for licking the butter.
More a type to dole the butter out of others in sparing doses.
He kind of likes to hoard the butter for himself, and he especially doesn't share it with, say, Catwoman. According to DC executives.
And Deirdre, you are very right. It is a very dangerous thing to deny the fairies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If they need their butter, make sure they get their butter.
Butter or milk, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
Be very specific about it.
And they never say no to a drop of whiskey.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't say no to a drop of anything now. Not if you're a fairy. You got to take what you can get.
Right. So that's all the comments so far. If anyone has any questions or things, please throw them into the comments and see us go on a wild tangent. Okay, so I've got a not a buttery story, but a bittersweet story. So I heard this story not too long ago, told by Claire Byrne, and I thought it was a really, really good story. So it's not an Irish one. It's Chinese. It comes from the 17th century. I'm not good on numbers. And it involves a man called Hu Tanbao. Now, Hu Tanbao, well, his life up until the end of it had not been particularly remarkable. He was a middling civil servant. His job was when the army came through to see that they were fed, housed, had everything they needed, sign the paperwork, say goodbye to them. One day, the army were coming through. He went to open the gates, get the paperwork, sign off on it, see if they needed any more rations. And then he saw the military inspector. And his jaw just dropped. He forgot what to do for a minute and then, of course, became very flustered and handed over, yes. There was just this man he'd never seen anyone like him before. He was, well, it wasn't that he was particularly tall, but he seemed to be just the right height for him. And it wasn't that he had like a super strong jaw, but his jaw just suited him so well. And it wasn't that his eyes were particularly deep and shiny, but they were just the right amount of deep and the right amount of shiny. And his hair seemed to be just the right amount of soft, and everything about him was just perfect for him. And that night, Tushin Bao, he went home and he tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't stop thinking about the military inspector and how he was just so well put together. Like, if you broke down all the parts, they would just be normal, but when you put them all together, it was... And he got no sleep that night. And the next day, he spent as much time as he could in the company of the military inspector, just checking sure, did he have everything he needed? Was the accommodation all right? Could he give him a tour of the town? Was there anything he needed? Did he need a bath? And the military inspector said that, well, yes, actually, he'd been on the road for quite a while. He would like a bath. And so Tushin Bao showed him where the bathhouse was and hoped that he would have a good bath, and then went to go. But you see, the military inspector had been fully dressed, full uniform, and Tushin Bao couldn't help wondering if all of him was as well put together as the bits he'd seen. I mean, his fingers, they fit his hand so well, but did the forearm fit as well? And the bicep and his shoulders, they looked good, but what were they like underneath? And his mind started painting a picture. And he knew he shouldn't. He knew this wasn't a good idea, but he had to know, did the picture in his mind match reality? And as he'd been thinking about this, his feet had been doing their own thing, and they'd wandered off behind the bathhouse to where there happened to be just a little hole in the wall. And his knees seemed to have bent down, and before he knew it, his eye was pressed up against the hole. And he was looking in at the military inspector, relaxing in the bath. And it was even better than the picture he'd been painting in his mind. And he just stared, and his heart began to beat faster. And he was having trouble remembering to breathe. And he felt this feeling, and he didn't know what this feeling was. It was amazing. And so he didn't notice that someone had walked up behind him until a hand suddenly clapped down on his shoulder, dragged him around to the front of the bathhouse. There were voices screaming, "Spy! Traitor!" And the military inspector came out, wrapped up in a towel, and one of the soldiers said, "I saw him. He was spying on you. He's a traitor. He's trying to gather military secrets." The military inspector looked down at Tushin Bao and said, "Is this true?" And Tushin Bao didn't really know what's going on. And so he said the truth, and he said, "I love you." Now, unfortunately, the military inspector, he didn't believe him. He assumed that Tushin Bao was lying, that he was a spy. So he made a signal, and suddenly all of the fists of the soldiers landed down on Tushin Bao, and he was dead. In fact, he was dead so quickly, his spirit didn't quite realize it was dead. And his spirit got a bit lost. It was a bit confused, and it was also so full of love still. So bursting with love. And the more he wandered, the more love seemed to fill him up. And he wandered and he wandered, and he could see into people now as a spirit, because spirits can see spirits. And he could see love growing in other people. And some of the love was the same as the love he'd felt. Some of the love was different love. And as he wandered around, his spirit began to change, because spirits don't really have a shape. They adapt as they move. And he wanted to share this. He didn't know what, so he started going into people's dreams, because dreams and the world of spirits are very close. And he went into people's dreams, and when people woke up, they would say to each other, "I had a dream about a rabbit last night." And when they had the dream about the rabbit, well, they that love inside them, that thing that was calling out, that was shining like a lighthouse, it would find another one similarly. And so people, well, they began to think that the rabbit dream must mean something. And it was mostly men who had the rabbit dream. And men who had the rabbit dream found other men who had the rabbit dream. And if they both had the rabbit dream, well, it was as if they were protected somehow. One day, Tu Shanbao slipped into the dream of an old man, a village elder. And he could see that inside this man, there was this love, this bright, shining love, but the man had built up walls around it, had hidden it. He was frightened of it. It was so bright and burning. And Tu Shanbao, in the dream, he showed him the light. And he showed it where the light was being shone far away, and how the two could be joined together. And when the man woke up after having the rabbit dream, he went and he built a small temple. And the temple was dedicated to the rabbit god, who had once been called Tu Shanbao, who had now become the guardian and the protector of men who love men. And that is I've only just heard that story in the last few weeks. So first time telling it. Hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was so cute.
It was very nice.
Yeah.
And I was just, doing a bit of a Wikipedia to also remember people's names, because I'm not good at remembering names. The cult of the rabbit god, the protector of men who love men, has been revived in Taiwan.
Nice.
Oh.
Yeah. And there's a temple, and they perform love ceremonies for gay couples. And yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's another reason
It's
Taiwan.
As of 2020, according to Wikipedia, it's the only shrine to the rabbit god of men who love men. But it's there. It's still there.
Nice. All right. So I am going to lower the tone significantly. I just thought I'd be honest about it. Really. Let me remember. I keep forgetting the name of this fucking horse. There we go. Okay, that should be stuck in my memory long enough. All right. So a very long time ago, or possibly last week, who knows, the plague has turned time into soup. Odin, the king of the Aesir and god of wisdom, built the city of Asgard. Now, I say god of wisdom, but when he built the city, he didn't really think much about defenses. You see, the Aesir had an awful lot of enemies. There were the Jotuns, the giants, there was the trolls, and they were just kind of all around, everywhere, surrounding Asgard and the Aesir. And they had no way of stopping them getting in. And this led to an awful lot of work for Odin's son, Thor. Thor had to run all over the place, beating the shite out of giants and trolls. But eventually, a builder came to Asgard. And he stepped in front of the Aesir. And he said, I am a builder. My name is Aristotle. And I can build for you, for all of Asgard, huge, enormous, thick walls to protect the entire city. And all that I ask for in return is the sun and the moon and to marry Freya. And so the Aesir, they thought about this for a moment, and they went off into seclusion for a little while to talk it over. And Tyr, he says, all I ask in return is the sun and that's literally a saying for things being very expensive. what the fuck is he on about? But Odin says, now lads, calm down. I don't like the offer any more than the rest of you, but listen, all we need to do is give our own terms. So let's say we agree. Let's say we agree to this deal that he can build the walls for us and he'll get Freya and the sun and the moon in return. And Freya at the moment was not happy about that. She was not happy about that at all. But Odin said, no, just let me finish. Just let me finish. But we say he has until the first day of summer to get it done. And if he doesn't get it done, he doesn't get paid. And we also say that if he doesn't do it by himself with the help of no other people, he doesn't get paid. So they bring these terms to Harry. And Harry, he goes, no, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Get it done by next summer. And no other people can help. No other people. So they shake on it. And he gets straight to work. With the help of his horse, Svadilfari. And the thing about Svadilfari is that he was a very, very strong, very powerful horse. And he could carry the load of roughly 100 men. And so with his huge, mighty horse helping him, the work was actually getting done quite fast. It was starting to look like Harry Stottle was going to get the job done. The walls kept building up higher and higher and faster and faster. And eventually it was only 3 days until the summer. And he only had the gate left to finish. And then Odin, god of wisdom, he decides that this entire situation is actually Loki's fault. Because let's be honest, queer people have been the scapegoats of society for time immemorial. So he says, Loki, what are you after doing? This is entirely down to you. You need to fix it. And Loki doesn't even complain. Loki is used to this. So Loki goes down to the wall and he takes a look at what's happening. And he notices that it's Svadilfari, the horse, who is doing most of the actual work. Not Harry Stottle at all. And so Loki, he thinks to himself, you know, I've seen worse, he says, as he stares at the horse. I've seen worse. So, I need to explain something. You see, Loki is gender fluid. And ordinarily, when somebody uses that term, they mean somebody who is comfortable moving between gender identities and gender roles. And I mean that as well. But what I mean specifically right now is a different meaning. You see, Loki is also a shapeshifter. So his body literally became somewhat fluid, and he turned into a horse, but not just a horse. His genitals also became fluid and transformed into a whole other shape, more beguiling to Svadilfari. And so Loki, in the form of a bear, struts out in front of Svadilfari, just giving a little bit of a wiggle and a little bit of a seductive, suggestive neigh and a whinny. And Svadilfari, Have you ever seen a horse piss? Because if you haven't, it's fucking massive. It's fucking huge. Like, you know the meter stick they'd have in the classroom in primary school? It's like that, but like as thick as your arm as well. So Loki and Svadilfari, they go off and do some measuring. Some very intimate measuring. And well, Loki keeps Svadilfari busy with the measuring for the next 3 days. And by the time summer rolls round, the gate of the wall was only half finished. So Harry Stottle, he finishes the gate. It's a bit late, but he finishes it. And he goes in to Asgard and he says, like, I know it's a little bit late, but I want my payment. I would like to get paid now. Unfortunately for Harry, though, Odin and the other Aesir, they're like, no, you broke the terms of our deal. Ah, said Harry. No, I didn't. You think I'm a fool? You think I didn't recognize that horse you sent out? And I'm spelling horse with a W at the start there. The fucking horse. I know a shapeshifter when I see one, no matter what shape it's in. I know you sabotaged the deal. So I want my payment now. And Odin just laughed at him. And that was when Harry Stottle revealed that truly he wasn't just a builder, but a Jotun himself. He grew to be 60 foot tall, and he started rampaging through Asgard. But of course, that was the moment that Thor returned to Asgard. That didn't end well for Harry. He may have been a giant, but Thor was a man who fought giants, and he had the mighty hammer Mjolnir. And with one swipe, he slapped Harry Stottle across the face, knocking him back down to the height of a mortal man and sending him across the 9 realms till he landed in Midgard, on a specific island in Midgard. Meanwhile, the gods were wondering exactly what Harry had meant when he'd been talking about a horse, and why he'd said he'd been spelling horse with a W at the start. That was weird. They were also wondering, where had Loki gone? They had sent him to take care of things, but he never got back, and he was gone for several months. 9, to be exact. And when he got back, he was carrying an 8-legged foal. Loki, where have you been? They said. And he said, oh, well, I wanted a little privacy. Pregnancy can be a difficult time, especially when it's an 8-legged horse. This is my son Sleipnir. And listen, you, he says to Odin. I can see the glint in your eye. I can see what you're thinking. If you dare sit on my son, I will end the world. Oh, what am I doing unmuting? I'm mute. I was telling that story.
How does one neigh or whinny seductively?
I think Nisha was doing an impression of it. I like that as Loki's motivation for ending the world. It wasn't that he got pissed at a dinner party.
Yeah.
He objected to children being mistreated.
Yeah, all those children get a shit time of it.
Absolutely. I'd be angry at the Aesir if I were Loki. Like, they blame
all
him for
6 of them.
I do love the dinner party, though. Just like finally getting too drunk and venting like decades of shit on everyone.
I just love that anytime they need something done, they're like, we will barter Freya. Freya, the only one of us who can grow fruit of immortality. Yeah, we'll use her as a bargaining chip.
Yeah. And Freya's just sitting there like, oh, not a fucking again. Really, lads?
I don't think she likes being the base unit of currency.
Mm.
No.
I was pleased to see Harry Stottle return.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the builder, he's unnamed. Every source I found, he's unnamed.
I'm just imagining this like Irish builder showing like, oh jeez, how much did it cost me to do that wall? No, 50 quid, I could get that up in a week.
I feel like that might be Harry's origin story.
Yeah, you said he had a bit of a trouble with the gate, was it? Yeah.
Would you look at that? Do you see that brickwork there? Cowboys, feckin' cowboys, I'm telling you, boy.
Who did you get in to do this place at all?
Sure, me and the lads from down the pub, we'll come down, we'll sort you out. Half a day, done. Pub by 6.
And look, we'll only take the sun or the moon.
And now we've no need of contracts here now. No.
It's just a good shake on it now. A word is a man's bond.
When I lived in Dublin, I was in an apartment that was basically the basement of my landlord's house. It was a townhouse in Ranelagh, and the apartment I was in used to be the servants' quarters. Now the handyman who set everything up in the apartment and made all the repairs and everything, we referred to him as Mad Tony. And Mad Tony was paid exclusively in free dentistry. Which I'm fairly certain is illegal. There was a lot of things wrong with that apartment. The rings on the hob, the knobs that you turn to turn them on. The lowest temperature was 6, and the highest temperature was 0.5.
Sounds about right.
There were 3 light switches in the kitchen. One did nothing. One turned on the kitchen light, and one had duct tape over it. No, electrical tape over it, because it would just kill you.
Yeah.
There was there was a kitchen island, and the fridge was under the kitchen island. The fridge was plugged in at a completely different wall, nowhere really near it. We're not sure how the wire got there entirely, but the wire for the plug came out of the wall just under the socket and then plugged into the socket.
Yes.
But there were 2 appliances wired into that one plug. One was the fridge and one was the extractor fan, but the extractor fan didn't have a pipe leading anywhere. and the shower. The foundation for the shower was made of wood. Wood that was completely unsealed and unvarnished. So it was rotten and stank. And I'm fairly certain at this point now, just after telling that story, I hadn't decided it was going to be Harry Stottle until I was telling it. But I'm now fairly certain that Mad Tony is a descendant of Harry Stottle.
I want to know, though, how much was he getting done to his teeth?
Comes in with diamonds.
I'm glad you survived.
Barely.
I do not miss renting in Dublin.
No, me neither.
Right, more stories.
Well, I could do the big, long, epic one.
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah.
Right. So where last we left off with Cuchulainn, he had gotten his first taste of blood and was going through some changes. Hair where there was no hair before, appendages suddenly growing to absurd lengths, and of course, the random ability to turn into an eldritch horror whereby his knees would snap backward, blood would shoot from his head, his ribcage would expose itself, and his jaw would hinge, while one eye shrank into his head, while the other grew to the size of a giant plate. Puberty. Shit for everyone. But now he'd made it to the other side, and puberty was doing him pretty damn well. Let's just say Cuchulainn had become a bit of a ride. Made sense. His dad, Lou, master of all crafts except the art of child rearing, was one of the two of the Danann. He was a gorgeous individual himself. Cuchulainn had inherited this, and now everyone, not everyone either wanted to be with him or fuck him. Everyone wanted to fuck him. Everyone. Including Crahor, we're going to say. And this was causing a bit of an issue for everyone in Ulster because the married men of Ulster were not allowed to fuck Cuchulainn, and their wives wanted to. This was causing them some distress. All the single people in Ulster couldn't find a date to save their lives. No one wanted to bother with them. Women were going around hanging dish plates on their eyes to mimic Cuchulainn. Some of them were talking about unhinging their jaws. It wasn't good. So they decided it was time to get Cuchulainn married. And they went around the provinces trying to find a suitable bride, but Cuchulainn was having none of it. This was Cuchulainn. He had all the surety of being a 16-year-old boy. He knew what was right for him. He only wanted Emer. Emer was the daughter of Fergal the Wily, who had built a fantastically defended fortress with 3 walls in the area of modern-day Fingal, County Dublin. Rough area. So I'd like to remind everyone that Emer actually has a really thick north side Dublin accent, which I'm not going to try and imitate, but really, like, super thick. And one day, Cuchulainn went down from Allenvacha to go and meet Emer at Fergal the Wily. And while he approached, he came on his glistening chariot. Emer watched. He rocked up, got off, and said, "How are you, hun?" She said, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" He replied he'd come down from the north and wished to travel towards the mountains before him. He was talking about her tits. She found this very charming, and they flirted back and forth in the old Irish fashion by naming the lore of various places and the random names of outcrops of rocks. Love. But now the problem. Fergal was a wily fucker. And I'll be honest, if I was Emer's father, I wouldn't want her going anywhere near Cuchulainn either. He wanted nothing to do with a madman from Ulster. But he was too smart to just refuse. He knew that would just mean Cuchulainn would kill him. Or worse yet, Emer would run away. Now, he said that he would not allow Cuchulainn to marry his daughter until he had proven himself by training under Scaha, the greatest warrior that Alba had ever known. Scaha just so happened to run a warrior academy on the Isle of Skye off Scotland. And Cuchulainn decided, I'll go and train under Scaha then. He set off on his little curragh, crossed over near Antrim, over to Scotland, sailed all the way up the sky, and travelled to where Dunscathach was. But then there was a problem. You see, Dunscathach was on an outcropping of rock. There was only a very thin bridge to get over. And outside, playing in the woods, Cuchulainn saw what he assumed were some of the trainees of Scatha. There were 3 rather good-looking but barely indistinguishable individuals singing in high tenors, the sons of Uisnech, and there was a very handsome young boy. His skin seemed to shine in the sun. His hair was chestnut brown. He had dark eyes like chocolate, even though Cuchulainn obviously wouldn't know the comparison to chocolate because that hadn't been discovered for another around 200,000 years in Europe anyway, but chocolate nonetheless. And his laugh rang like bells. But Cuchulainn paid them no mind. He was on a mission. He marched right onto the bridge, and as soon as he stepped on it, it shrank to the width of a hair. He tumbled down, falling in the water below. He pulled himself back up on the rocks and found everyone laughing. The sons of Uisnech laughing in perfect 3-part harmony. And this aggravated Cuchulainn. So he went back on the bridge, but this time it shrank to the length of his thumb, and once again he crashed into the water. The guffaws were even louder this time, the harmony much more complex, and Cuchulainn was a bit pissed at this point. As usual, he decided he'd vent his frustrations by beating the shit out of something. And the closest thing to beat the shit out of was the boy with the shiny skin. So he leapt on him, started trying to grab at his chestnut hair, started punching each other. The boy just laughed. He just kept laughing while dodging Cuchulainn's punches, blowing him kisses the whole time. Till eventually, Cuchulainn was exhausted. So he just stopped what he was doing, laughed and stretched out his hand. I'm Cuchulainn. Who are you? I'm Ferdia, said the boy. It seems to me like you need some help getting inside the castle. Look, the next time you step on the bridge, the middle section is going to shoot up as high as twice your height. Hope that helps. Well, it didn't help. Cuchulainn jumped onto the bridge, right at the center point, and as it rose, he jumped again, his perfect salmon leap. He leapt over into Dunscathach, and he looked around. There was no one. But then he heard a snapping of a branch, and he looked up, and he saw a rather short, elderly woman. She cowered herself very well. Her back was completely straight. She was completely poised, waiting on the tree branch. So he asked this crazy woman where Scathaach was. Oh, she said, didn't see you there. I'm sure he'll be back in a while. So Cuchulainn waited. And now he's getting hungrier and hungrier and colder. This was the Isle of Skye. The weather's not pleasant. So after an hour or two passed, he asked the woman again, do you know when Scathaach's getting back? And she said, oh, well, I'm sure Scathaach will be back shortly, just as soon as he arrives. Another few hours passed. Cuchulainn's stomach is growling like the thunderclaps now. And then he sees this tiny little bird flit down, land on the tree. Ah, the old woman says, he's back now. Cuchulainn looked at the bird. He hadn't expected that the greatest warrior that Scotland had ever produced was merely a robin. He was wondering how this robin was going to train him, how he was meant to learn from a bird to speak Irish. And the old woman looked at him and said, what's wrong? Well, I don't understand how I'm meant to train under a bird. What are they going to do? Don't you like birds? I heard your mother was a bird for a time. Don't talk about my mother, said Cuchulainn. Well, if it's training you want, the bird can help you. Can't help you at all, but I could help you, said the old woman. And who are you, said Cuchulainn. Well, I'm Scathaach, she said. And Cuchulainn didn't believe a word of it. Scathaach, he said, is the greatest warrior that Scotland has ever produced. How can a woman be the greatest? And he was already on his arse. The old woman had jumped down and had thrown about 50 punches to very tender points in Cuchulainn's body. He could barely move. He groaned. Let that be your first lesson, she said. We'll meet tomorrow. And so it was. From that day on, Cuchulainn trained under Scathaach alongside the sons of Uisnech and Ferdia. Whenever it came time to partner for the exercises, Cuchulainn found himself drawn to Ferdia. Not just because they were both equally matched. To be honest, he could trounce almost everyone else in the academy. The only one who could keep up with him was Ferdia. But he just liked being around Ferdia. They started by just doing their exercises together, but then they took their meals together, then they spent their free time together. And eventually, one evening, as they were partying after a particularly heavy day of exercise, Ferdia went back to Cuchulain's tent. In the sunset, they stayed up late chatting. And eventually, Cuchulain just said, "There's no point in going back to your tent. You should just stay here with me." And from that day on, they shared one bed. Every night after their days of training, they'd cuddle up together. Cuchulain would stroke Ferdia's chestnut hair, rub his chest, which you always found so strange because there was a reason his skin was so shiny. It wasn't actually skin. As Cuchulain traced it along his finger, he noticed that it was actually made of horn, like a deer. But time passed. Eventually, Cuchulain had completed his training in the Scatha, and it was time to return home and claim his wife. He returned to Ireland, did horrific things to Fergal. I won't even get into it. Let's just say he married Emer. She's not the focus of this story. She's fantastic in her own right, but come on, it's Pride Month. But then trouble started to brew in Ireland. You see, Queen Maeve and Ailill had not gone great with their marriage counselling. Things weren't going well, and the only way to mollify her was to get her a particularly sizable bull. And the cattle raid of Cooley broke out. As some of us are aware, the people of Ulster were under a terrible curse that at their greatest hour of need, they would be struck low by the pains of childbirth. Everyone in Ulster was struck low, apart from Cuchulain, and for some reason his charioteer, who is a legend. But he went off. He and Laig ran a guerrilla campaign against the forces of Connacht. They could barely advance a mile without losing 50 men. Till eventually, Maeve had enough. She was sick of Cuchulain picking off her forces. None of them were even willing to go forward in the night. So she came up with a plan. She sent messengers to Cuchulain saying that she would not send her whole army against him. He would agree to meet one of her champions each day at a river. While they fought, her army could advance, but as soon as one side, as Cuchulain bested her champion, they would have to stop for the night. Well, Cuchulain didn't see a problem with this. And for the next several days, it was absolute slaughter. He did horrific things to the poor people of Connacht. One man doesn't even have bowels anymore. One by one, her greatest warriors were picked off. One by one, the greatest champions of Connacht fell. So there was only one option. The option that Maeve had really wanted from the start. Ferdia. Ferdia had been born in Connacht. Ferdia was a son of Connacht. So she sent for him. He came, and she didn't say anything about fighting Cuchulain first. She just poured him a drink. They played some fiddle. She poured him a drink. They listened to some music. She poured him a drink. And with each drink that was poured, she just lowered the hemline on her dress ever so slightly and lifted the skirts ever so slightly. Till, well, let's just say a heaving bosom doesn't do her justice. And then she said, "You probably know why I've called you here, Ferdia. You are the only one who can stand against Cuchulain. He has slaughtered dozens of your countrymen. It is your duty to the people of Connacht that you go face him now." But Ferdia refused. He said he would not fight his foster brother. He would not fight Cuchulain. And then Maeve smiled. "Ah, I could only hope that the love that Cuchulain has for you is as great as your love for him. Tell me, did you get an invitation to his wedding?" The next day, when Cuchulain went to the ford, prepared to meet Connacht's new champion, his heart fell when he saw Ferdia approach. He went up to him. He said he'd hoped that anyone but him had come to face him, but Ferdia couldn't even look him in the eye. He just mumbled something and said that they'd fight with short spears. And so they fought with the short spears. From the moment the sun rose, Cuchulain and Ferdia were on top of each other, each blow matched for intensity by the other, each blow that was not blocked, cutting a wound on the other side. By the end of the day, they were both dripping with blood and heaving from exhaustion, but neither could be proved stronger than the other. So they parted for the night. Cuchulainn, who had medicine and herbs with him, sent some over to Ferdia to heal his wounds, and Ferdia, who sent food for Cuchulainn to eat. They ate well, and their wounds were healed that night, and they met on the next day. The next day, they fought with heavy spears, and once again, their blows were matched, blow for blow. And again, no victor could be decided. So they met on the third day, and they decided they'd fight with their long swords. They slashed and hacked at each other. The blood spilled and turned the river red, but still, they were evenly matched. Until the last day, Ashton did not say a word. They did fight again with the long spears, but this time, Cuchulainn took up the gay Bolga. This had been Skahak's parting gift, an ancient spear forged from the bones of a sea monster. The gay Bolga could only be thrown by your foot from a river. It would find the softest, most penetrable part of the individual. And once it entered in someone's flesh, thousands of little spikes would spring out. Cuchulainn and Ferdia fought and fought. And for the first time, one was gaining the upper hand. Ferdia. Cuchulainn didn't understand it. He'd never found someone equal to him before, much less better. But each blow, he felt himself weakening. Each strike from Ferdia laid him lower than before. His breath was labored. He couldn't fight any longer. Eventually, after a mighty blow, Ferdia forced him into the river. And that's when he struck. From out of the river, thrown by his foot, came the gay Volga. And it searched for the only vulnerable part of Ferdia. His skin was impenetrable. There was no way to break it. But thankfully, there was already a hole. The gay Bolga shot right up inside Ferdia's anus and exploded. Cuchulainn went to his foster brother, held him in his arms, and he began to keen. He sang of his love for Ferdia, how he'd wished no woman had ever come between them, how he had hoped that they would spend their days laughing together. And after he sang his song, Cuchulainn fainted. The rest is the tale of the Toynbee Coolia. How, after everything, the men of Ulster awoke from their birth pangs, brought the forces of Connacht back to Connacht. How the Don Coolia was stolen, finally met the Finn Bannock on the field of battle, and how both great bulls were lost to the world. But that didn't matter to Cuchulainn at the time. At the time, all Cuchulainn could focus on was Ferdia. Which is a rather sad one, to be perfectly honest. But then again, it's Cuchulainn. He doesn't get to have a happy ending.
Aww.
Yeah. Again, the marriage issues of two straights hurt the queer people.
I just, anytime I think of Ferdy at the Forge, I just think of the Horselip song.
Yeah, it was in my head.
Why are all these straight people ruining marriage for us?
Because marriage is an institution to, turn people into worker producing machines. And
Yeah.
Or for trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Marriage
to
makes
make families together.
Well, I'm
We're all depressing now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Let's try to lighten the mood. Nisha had an idea for Scohog School as the Heathers,
Yes.
with the three sons of Ishnok, of course, being the Heathers.
Yeah.
Well, they would definitely have been the jocks in high school. Like,
Yeah.
But they were
Can you
famed
show us
singers.
how-
They weren't like great warrior. I mean, they got pulverized. They were. I sort of think of them more as like the
They
Glee
couldn't
Club.
get their backs to each other in time. That's all they needed. If all three of them had their backs together, all Ulster couldn't stand against them. But with only two of them with their backs to each other, didn't end well.
They fell over because triangles are strong.
Mm-hmm. Should have paid more attention to Pythagoras.
see, this is why there should be more polytriads.
Yes.
Triangles are
Just
a
not
stronger
sure
shape.
if polytriad should be made of three brothers, but
Fair.
I mean, I was going to tell the story, thinking I could tell the story of Gold Tree and Silver Tree because that ends with the power of a triad. But I told that quite recently on the stream, so I'll give it a rest for a while.
I have another nice Irish story.
Does it end in death and despair?
it's Irish.
No, not quite. It ends in the beginning of a lot of death and despair. Actually, there's death and despair right at the start. See, first of all, Cool was dead. Okay? Cool was dead. And what had he done? Only left his missus up the pole, so to speak. Now, his missus was a woman named Myrnia. And over the long, cold winter, as Cool had been staying in Myrna's father's fort, her father was Tig McNutt, they had grown closer and they had whiled away those cold winter nights together. Now, when the father found out about this, he was none too pleased. He contacted a man called Gull MacMorna. Now, Gull MacMorna was the head of Clan Morna, which is one half of the Fianna, the other half being Clan Bashkna, of which Cool was a head of. Now, Gull MacMorna wasn't a particularly nice man. He had been fairly good mates with Cool, but they'd had a bit of a falling out. So, naturally, Gull MacMorna killed him. Now, this left Myrna in a very difficult position. She was expecting a baby, nowhere to go. Her own father had betrayed her boyfriend, and, well, now there was talk of him wanting to burn her alive. So that really wasn't looking good for Myrna at all. So she made a plan. She knew that Cool had a sister called Bodmal. Now, Bodmal was a bit of a mystery, really. She'd disappeared off up into the mountains quite a few years ago and kind of returned every now and again with baskets of vegan goodies and, homemade honey, hemp dresses, your usual sorts of stuff. And she'd really taken a liking to flannel shirts as well. So Myrna went off to find Bodmal. And when she found Bodmal, which was in the Sleepmoon Mountains, she found someone else as well, a woman called Leah Lucra. Now, Leah Lucra was your typical ancient Ireland butch lesbian, okay? So she wore leather jackets lined with wool and fur. She was really good with trapping. She really good with spears. She was a brilliant warrior. And she also cut her hair very short and slicked it back and your typical lumberjack lesbian stuff. So anyway, Myrna arrives in Sleafboom, now about 8.5 months pregnant. She meets Bodmal, and Bodmal sees Myrna. She sees the lump, and she goes, "Fucking head of brother, what the fuck?" When she calms down, she says to Myrna, "Well, do you have a plan? What are you going to do? Clan Bashkna will be out looking for you, and Clan Morna, well, they'll be looking for you and to kill you." Myrna says, "Well, see, I can do this thing. My father put a curse on me. I turn into a deer. Now, I've been working on this for a little while, and I think I can do it of my own volition. It no longer just randomly happens, or when my father gets in one of his moods and doesn't want to talk to me. But I can't do it while I'm pregnant. So can I stay here until the baby is born? And Bodmal says, yeah, okay, fine. And Leah Lucre says, well, I suppose so. I don't really like babies, but yeah. So they stay there for about 2 weeks. And Myrna gives birth to a beautiful baby boy with bright blonde hair. She names him Devna. Now, there's a bit of a decision to be made here. Myrna, to be safe, has to stay in the form of a deer, but little baby Devna can't change into the form of a deer. Now, as we all know, newborn deer, well, they can walk pretty much instantly and run fairly quickly. Baby humans can't do that. We're basically like jelly beans with bones that can be broken if you breathe on us too hard. So, Myrna, about a week after she's given birth, she wraps baby Devna up nice and tight, kisses him on the forehead, and then leaves. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Leah Lucre and Bodmal are awakened by a screaming so shrill and so terrible that they think their ears are about to burst. And Bodmal looks at Leah Lucre and she says, why hasn't Myrna got to the baby yet? And Leah Lucre says, why? But the screaming just doesn't stop. So up they get. They go out to find Myrna, but of course Myrna's not there. They find little baby Devna wrapped up. And as soon as little baby Devna sees his auntie, he smiles and looks up at them both. And Leah Lucre's heart melts. She sees this beautiful blue-eyed little baby and she is tickling him and she's saying, oh, you need to be. And Bodmal, all she can see is that those blue eyes are the same as her brother's. And it's all that's left of her brother. So, the weeks pass and they get into the rhythm of the nighttime feedings. Now, they're lucky enough that they had a couple of goats there because otherwise they would have been fairly stuck, to be honest. But baby Devna grew quickly and strong on the goat's milk. And he kept growing. By the time he was 2, he could run faster than either of them. So they decided to start training him because, well, the world was a dangerous place for little Devna. Some people wanted him dead. Some people wanted to use him. So Leah Lucre came up with a very simple but very strange training regimen. She gave little baby Devna a stick, and she held a stick in her own hand, and they stood either side of a tree. Leah, she'd sneak around the tree, and she hit him on the legs with a stick, and he cried, ow! And she said, you tried to hit me. And he tried, and he tried, and he tried, and he tried, but he couldn't. They kept doing this, and every day, Leah Lucre would hit him on the legs every single time, and he never touched her once. They did this every single day from ages 2 to ages 7. Meanwhile, Bodmal taught him all of the arts of the forest. She taught him how to find medicine in moss. She taught him what berries you could eat and what berries you could make somebody else eat so that they would never eat ever again. She taught him how to tell north from south, how to hunt, and how to make yourself better, how to heal. She also taught him some simple spells, spells for protection, spells for finding water. But by the time he was 7, he had all of this knowledge in his head. And on his 7th birthday, he managed one big step. he hit Leolucra right across the legs. She smiled, and Bodmal smiled. And then they got sad. They had heard whisperings that Clan Mornia were coming close to where they were. It was no longer safe for little baby Devna to be with them. And he was ready. 7 years old, and he was ready to go out in the world. So they packed him up, a little basket, a little bit of food, a lot of weapons, some clothing, and with a story. The story of who he was, where he was from, who his mother was, and where he should go. And they gave him a new name, because the name of Devna wasn't safe. They called him Fionn. They sent him off to a man named Finengus. Now, Finengus was a longtime friend of theirs, very big into fishing. In fact, he spent 7 whole years fishing, doing nothing else. But they knew that for now, Fionn would be safe there. As they saw little baby Devna, now known as Fionn, Fionn, son of Cool, they smiled, they looked at each other. They were empty nesters. But they knew that there was more to come for little Fionn.
Oh, an actually nice story.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Couple of ancient Ireland.
Huh?
Good old lesbian power couple of ancient Ireland.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I just kind of imagine them as like living in some sort of like commune where they're like self-sufficient and, you know, like make their own hummus.
Oh, there's definitely a farmer's market nearby.
Oh yeah.
Well, they did teach him like how to hunt and everything, didn't they? So
Oh.
Yeah, like Leolucra, like I didn't really say it in it, but she taught him everything he knew.
mm-hmm.
Like she was a trainer of warriors. That was her profession.
Yeah.
Like the community college version of Skaha's like academy.
Like, as far as I know, the only thing they didn't teach him was poetry.
Yeah, which, you know, why he had to go off to Fishman.
Yeah.
So should we end it there, or
We could end it on a pleasant note.
because I have
Oh, but I've
a short,
got
slightly
other
filled
ones.
story.
I'm two shortish Greek ones, which one of them is pretty depressing, but the other one's not strictly depressing.
All right.
I'll give it a go. So long ago in ancient Greece, there was a man called Cygnus. Cygnus was the finest hunter the world had ever seen, and he fucking knew it. Like, he was the ancient Greek equivalent of those gym bodybuilders who are spending all their days building up those big muscles. He loved his body, loved how fit he looked shooting his bow. And eventually, other people noticed just how talented he was at hunting, and they started to follow him around. All the men wanted to sleep with her. They were obsessed with her. But it just kind of went to his head. He started being really aggressive to them, started being an absolute dick whenever he had too much wine, basically to test if they'd actually stay around, because he didn't really think any of them truly loved and cared for him, because he didn't love himself. And except for one. He eventually drove everyone away, apart from Phileas. Now, Phileas was as loyal as a dog. He would go everywhere. He would take all of Cygnus's shit. Every single day, he'd kiss Cygnus goodnight and say, "I love you, Cygnus." Cygnus would give him the finger and say, "Fuck off." Love. Until one day, Cygnus woke up and he looked down at Phileas and decided, you know what? I'm gonna see if he really does love me. So he kicked him awake and said, "Hey, bitch, if you really want to get with me, and like really get with me, get with all of this, you need to do something for me." There's been a lion in the area. It's terrorizing everyone. They asked me to get rid of it. I need to work on my glutes. So while I'm gluting, can you go off and just take care of it? And by the way, if you really love me, you won't use any weapons. So Phileas obviously did really love Cygnus. So he decided he'd go and take care of the lion. He tracked it down, and all while he was tracking it down, he was coming up with a plan to kill the lion without using weapons. And he had a great idea. Eventually, he found a part of the trail where the lion seemed to pass every day, and he just got a shit ton of food. He got every scrap of food he could eat, and he started stuffing his face until his belly began to distend. He then grabbed several drugs of wine and just started chugging them down. And as his stomach was now nicely full with food and liquor, he put his finger down his throat, vomited it all up. He was there for a good 3 minutes, getting it all out. And then he stripped naked and hid in the nearby bushes. Along came the lion, and as we all know, lions don't see vomit, they see dinner. The lion began chowing down on the vomit of Phileas, but Phileas had actually drunk so much wine that this vomit was laced. It was about 80% proof. So the lion got shit-faced. The lion was drunk off its tits, just rolling around on the ground. And that's when Phileas struck. Phileas went in and wrapped his clothes around the lion's mouth and started just beating it with his fists. Eventually, the lion was dead, and still stark naked, covered with lion blood and his own vomit. He dragged the corpse back to Cygnus and said, "I'll just see how much I love you now." Well, Cygnus had to admit he had accomplished the task. So he said, "Well, you did okay, Phileas. I mean, I would have done it quicker and I wouldn't be covered in shit. So you had to take a shower. I'm going to show this lion to the populace, and we'll talk tomorrow." The next day, Phileas was kicked awake by Cygnus once again, who said, "Hey, I've been thinking it over. I think you need to do more. I'm just not quite certain you love me. There's 2 vultures, man-eating, flying around the area, causing havoc. I have once again been asked to take care of these vultures, but these abs don't work on themselves. I'm going to train my abs. You take care of the vultures, and if you really love me, you won't use any weapons and you bring me them back alive. Thank you." And now Phileas is even more screwed. Man-eating vultures. He had no idea what to do. He started wandering around, and then he spied an eagle flying overhead. Down plopped a half deer, hare, right at his feet. And he suddenly had an idea. He grabbed the half-dead deer, made sure it was fully dead, and just began smearing himself with its blood and then stripped first, smeared himself with the blood and entrails, put his clothes in a nice little heap beside himself, and then lay down pretending to be dead. Naturally, the vultures, wheeling overhead, spotted him. They came down, and just as they were about to peck at him, he leapt into action, tied them up with his clothes, grabbed them by the legs, and brought them back to Cygnus. And once again, Cygnus was actually pretty impressed. He thought, maybe Phileas really does love me. But I'm going to give him another test, just to be sure. So the next day, he more gently kicked Phileas awake. You might even say it wasn't a full kick, just a gentle prod with the foot in the small of the back. "Hey, I've got a plan. Now, if you do this, I will profess my love to you forever. You and I will be an item. I'll actually make us Facebook official. But you've got to go and get a bull, sacrifice it to Zeus in his temple, and you can't use any weapons. Thank you, love you, bye." So he was screwed now. This is a bull. Bulls were serious shit in ancient Greece. He knew he did not stand a chance against the bull. So he did the only thing he could. He started praying to Hercules. Because Hercules was a sound lad. He knew he'd help him out. And he was right. Because as soon as he started praying to Hercules, 2 bulls emerged out of nowhere. And they started fighting over a heifer. Phileas waited for them to wear themselves out, and when they were nice and tired, he ran in, stripped himself naked, made a rope out of his clothes, bound the bull, and dragged it to the temple of Zeus. He sacrificed the bull and was about to head back to Cygnus when suddenly, in all his glory, Hercules appeared before him. And he said, "Phileus, mate, what are you doing? Can't you see you're in an abusive relationship? He is taken for granted. He is gaslighting you. He does not love you because he can't love himself. Phileus, I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you a sense of self-worth." And from that moment on, Phileus had a sense of self-worth. He realized that by loving himself, he didn't need to seek outside affection. He did not need the validation from Cygnus anymore. So he went up to Cygnus, kicked him right in those well-toned glutes, and he never saw him again. But now Cygnus, his world was over. Just as he'd seen Phileus approach, he'd finally decided he was going to open his heart to him. And now it had all been taken away, all the fans, all the adoration gone. So the Greek would, and he killed himself. His mother, upon hearing this, killed herself as well. But Apollo, patron saint of homosexuals and mothers, decided that he would not allow this. Instead, he took their souls back from Hades and transformed them into two swans. And they lived on a lake till the end of their days, which became known as Swan Lake. But then Phileus heard about this, and all the pangs of love came back, all the guilt washed over him because he kind of blamed himself for Cygnus' suicide. So he moved into a shack beside the lake and lived there till he died. And that's love. Meanwhile, thousands of years before this happened, Prometheus was given a task by Zeus. Zeus had decided that there weren't enough fuckable things on Earth for him to fuck, so he wanted Prometheus to create a few more fuckable things, namely humanity. As a bonus, he was going to get some worship out of it. Sex, worship. Zeus thought this was a great idea. So did Prometheus. Prometheus gathered clay from the bottom of the river and began forging creatures that looked quite like himself and Zeus. 2 arms, 2 legs, head, genitals of some description. And that was the tricky part, because Prometheus was fantastic at sculpting people, but he found the genitals very, 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 very difficult. So he was going to leave them to last. And at this stage, he'd done probably around 80% of the population that would start humanity off. There was just still a few of them left that didn't have their genitals assigned. And he was about to get to work doing that when he got a knock on his door, and who should be there? Dionysus, with a jug of wine. Dionysus had just come back from Syria after skinning a guy. He really wanted to let loose. So he and Prometheus started drinking. And drinking, and drinking, and drinking, and drinking. Whole day passed in an absolute blur. Prometheus woke up very groggy. He saw Dionysus in a dress, knew they must have had a very fun evening, but he really needed to finish the order for Zeus. So he got doing all the genitals. And because he was still so hungover, he kept putting the genitals on the wrong people. And that is how transgendered people came into existence in the Hellenistic world.
That's cute.
See, I told you I wouldn't end it on a completely horrific note.
I am glad you ended that kicked him in. I'm glad you ended with kicked him in his well-toned glutes, because I was thinking at first, nobody has well-toned testicles. They don't exist. That's not real.
Imagine if it was. How weird would it be? I mean, testicles are weird anyway, but
they look like they're made of elbow skin.
Yeah. I mean, genitals in general are a bit weird. They all look like sort of sea creatures that should be down deep in the dark.
yeah.
There is a short film that was at the Sundance Festival. It's on YouTube. It's called Late Bloomer. And it is about a child at their first sex ed class interpreting the genitals as Lovecraftian monsters from the deep.
I mean,
makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing attractive about them
No.
at all.
No.
I disagree, but that's me.
Oh, I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so.
Who are we if people want to go find more of us? Or shout at
We
us?
are unlicensed oral arts. Our arts are unlicensed and oral by nature. We tweet on the Twitter, we face on the book, we you on the tube, sometimes we tube on the you. We try to do live streams every month. Sometimes we try to do videos, but we are expert at procrastination and traction. We love tangents, and if you'd like more of this stuff, please try and listen to us on the Twitter, on the Facebook, particularly on the monthly live videos. If you have any suggestions for stories you'd like to hear, topics you'd like to hear about, just let us know.
Yeah. And there's links to our various individual Twitters and other platform programming things.
Yes, because
In the
I'm
description
mostly just
box
here with you on my-
below.
Yeah, that thing.
Yes, that will be there.
So
Because
for
Emily,
me, I
you also are
exclusively communicate via smoke signal, telegram, and one trained pigeon named Jeffrey.
Jeffrey's been quite busy of late, though. Best not bother Jeffrey.
Yeah,
Like this,
he hasn't been getting his naps.
Oh.
Shannon isn't even really on camera. This is a collection of still frames being carried back and forth by Jeffrey. Jeffrey is wrecked.
Second blank red tape, am I right?
Please, what union can I join?
The Pigeon Union.
Help me. Oh,
Because we can also
Jeffrey.
find Emily and Shannon as part of the Shadow Girls.
Yeah, Tales from the Shadows or Sounds from the Shadows.
Mhm.
We do
And the
shadows.
wonderful Stephen is found at Hog and Dice, I believe.
On basically every platform.
Anisha, where can we find you apart from lurking in our dreams?
Generally dodgy looking alleyways. I've been known to frequent the Leprechaun Museum once again, which is a dangerous place. I'm slightly more censored in there. I actually have to try and keep things vaguely child appropriate. But generally, if you need me, I'll be there. Just say my name 3 times looking in there.
Right. And good night. Happy
Good
Pride.
night.
And let me try to find the right buttons to turn this off. Every stream, I forget where the button is.